Hi everyone in EPGD land, this is Eric Rodabois, EPGD Attorneys at Law PA, EPGD Business Law, doing business as. And today I'm going to do a follow-up on the video I just did, so there might be a week in between. So last week, or 5 minutes ago, I just did a video on my client who got served in the middle of the night with papers for a car accident that happened a few months ago, and she thought the insurance company was going to take care of it. And the moral of that story was you should actually read your contract with your insurance company, because there's going to be a lot of important details such as exclusions, such as limitations of liability, such as will they cover your attorney costs, etc. And also the moral of that story was that your insurance contract is the most comprehensive and most complex contract in your life that you will probably never have your attorney read until it's too late. So I got to talking with my associate Elizabeth, who handles all of our estate planning, wills, and trusts. And a few minutes before that, we were talking about probate and how probate is this terrible court process that is completely avoidable as long as you have an estate plan. Completely avoidable. Like, if you have a probate, it means that your family member didn't have a plan, or at least didn't have a well-executed plan. So then we got to talking about, well, what if my client's parents pass away and this client inherits a bunch of money? What would happen? Because my client kept saying, I don't care if there's a judgment against me because I don't have that much money. And I said, well, what about your job? Right? Because if you have a judgment against somebody, you can take a garnishment of their bank account. You can put a lien on real property. In Florida, it's hard to execute on that lien if it's homestead. It's almost impossible. Not impossible, but almost impossible. But in other states, maybe there isn't homestead protections. And then also, so you can put a lien on real property, or if they have investment properties, beautiful. You put a lien on it, you can foreclose on it here in Florida. You can also seize bank accounts. And of course, you can get a garnishment of their wages. Typically, it's up to 25%. So if somebody has a W-2 paycheck, their employer will get a letter from the court or from the lawyer, with a subpoena from the court, authorizing them to take a writ, which means they can take up to 25% for the next 20 years potentially to satisfy this judgment, which is going to be accruing interest and maybe attorney's fees for any proceeding supplementary, which is when the lawyers keep working to try and collect on the judgment afterwards. All right, so the question is, what happens if my client's parents pass away and my client inherits a whole bunch of money? Now all of a sudden, let's just say that there's a judgment for $1 million against her. And let's say that she does as good as she can to not have that collected against her. She quits her job, she moves into somebody else's house, so she doesn't have any real property, she keeps her bank account balances really low, and basically she becomes what's called uncollectible. All right? So for all intents and purposes, this judgment is just a worthless piece of paper like this. All right? It's just signed by a judge. And these pieces of paper have a statute of limitations. Here in Florida, the statute of limitations on a judgment is 10 years and can be renewed for another 10 years. So you got 20 years to collect on this piece of paper signed by a judge. Well, all of a sudden, it's really sad. The client's parents pass away and she inherits a bunch of money. And the question is, what's going to happen to that money? Well, in the story as I'm telling it, the judgment creditor, if they ever find out about it, can go and try and take that $1 million plus all the interest that's accrued and try and take it out of this person's inheritance. And my client, having known that there was a judgment, if they try and do any transfers, like their parents die, they get a big wire transfer from the estate account into their personal account, and then they quickly try and move it somewhere else. Well, in Florida, that would be called a fraudulent transfer, because you're moving money to avoid a judgment. Problems can ensue. So the solution, and this is the solution, so if you're the parents and you find out that there's a big judgment against the child, and you know that someday you're going to have assets that you're going to be transferring to that child, the solution is to create a trust, which, by the way, you should already have so that you can avoid probate. Remember I said that a few minutes ago? But you're going to create a trust, and instead of distributing everything to that child, you're going to make that child an ongoing beneficiary of the trust and have a third-party trustee, such as a banker or a lawyer or an accountant or another family member. And that trustee will then have the ability to make distributions on a regular basis. And in addition to that, typically to distributions of income of the trust, because typically trust assets are going to be invested in financial accounts, brokerage accounts, and so it'll have income. But then you'll also have distributions for the health, education, support, and maintenance, which is the standard 4 letters that we use: health, education, support, and maintenance. So the person could say, hey, I need a new car so I can get around, and the trustee could decide in their discretion whether or not to do it. But here's the beautiful thing. If there's a spendthrift clause in the trust, which most trusts have, it means that the creditors of the child can't go after the trust. So that child can just live the rest of their life slowly but surely taking money from the inheritance, but instead of that inheritance directly going to the judgment creditors, the inheritance will slowly but surely be paid to the child, thus avoiding, hopefully, that judgment creditor. So if any of you guys have questions about that or know someone who might be in that situation, give me a call. This is Eric Rodobois from EPGD Land.